Tom Slater is still with me in the studio. I'm delighted to say joining us right now is Lord Robert Hayward. He's a Conservative peer and polling expert. A good morning and a very happy New Year to you.
Good morning, and to you too, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And to Tom, I suppose I should say as well.
I must ask you, first of all, actually, about these migrant numbers. Look, you know as well as I do that the migrant issue, whether it's illegal migration, legal migration, stopping the boats, is a huge, big issue for voters. It was one of the top 5 pledges that the Prime Minister said he wanted to be judged on. How big an issue is this right now?
It is a big issue. If you look at opinion polls, the main issue or the key issue every single time in all the polls is the economy in one form or another. You call it cost of living, you call it employment, you call it whatever. But effectively, the economy is the first issue. Beyond that, there are 3 issues that appear most persistently: climate change, the NHS, and immigration. Climate change matters enormously to younger people in terms of voting surveys. The NHS is very heavily Labour-oriented, and in fact, the Tories have done badly on the NHS for decades, so there isn't that much shift to occur. On immigration, it is a key issue, as I say, one of the second, third or fourth issues, and it matters very heavily to Tory voters, particularly the 2019 cohort.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the number 1 issues. You say climate change is a big issue for younger voters. I mean, they say it is, but also, rather crucially, young people don't vote very often. They talk a good game, they don't vote. So it doesn't matter as much. I really do wish that Rishi Sunak would stop any of that nonsense. He got a little bit sensible on net zero, staff trying to delay it, but he hasn't gone sane on it yet, something I do hold against him, I have to say. Look, you mentioned the NHS as well. We've got that 6-day junior doctors' strike starting tomorrow. That is going to have a huge impact on patients. I mean, and this at a time when we are also in, the usual winter crisis with flu and COVID as well, and basically the general backlog anyway. So was it 7.5 million people waiting for routine operations and treatments? How much, in the polling you've done, how much do people blame the doctors for that, on the failures of NHS management, and how much do they blame the government for it?
I think if you go back a few months, and you referred to this earlier on, the consultants were on strike, nurses were on strike, a whole series of other people on strike. And we're now in the position where it's junior doctors on strike, saying 35%. The fact that the actual inflation rate, Rishi's probable one major success, has come down dramatically, makes the argument about 35%. It was tenuous when inflation was at 11%.
Yeah.
When inflation is around 4% or so, it actually looks completely out of kilter, and therefore the junior doctors will run out of popular support. They never had as much support as the nurses in the polls anyway, but they get on ever more difficult ground.
Yeah, it always fascinates me, how much nurses are deified. I was always, yeah, they do a hard job, but I was always absolutely fascinated when I asked people, oh, nurses should definitely get more pay. I always think, what do you think nurses earn? Most people think they earn about half what they actually do, fascinatingly. But doctors, I think most people think they earn a lot more than they do. A lot of those doctors, highly skilled, highly trained, carrying out pretty much the same job as the consultants, but paid a heck of a lot less and doing the worst shifts.
Yes, of course, there's a huge range in doctors' pay, and you're right. People, when they ask about doctors, probably tend to think about consultants.
On the golf
course. But there
course,
just is a massive range. Sorry?
On the golf course with the Jag.
Absolutely.
No, it's fascinating. So in terms of the general election approaching, because we are in, as all of the Westminster bubble keep telling us, the general election year, although technically it could be as late as January 2025, legally, constitutionally, couldn't it? Realistically, it's a spring or an autumn election. Have you got money on which one you think that's going to be, and what would the reasons be for choosing spring or choosing the autumn?
Anybody who knows me knows I don't bet, but having said that, the answer is October/November, October campaign, possibly finishing in November for election day. There are arguments for going particularly in May, because it would coincide with the local elections. It would also mean that a fair number of people would not have had to renew their mortgage payments where it's likely to leap. But against that, the probability, and where I am, is that it will be October, November, because inflation is going to continue to come down, subject obviously to wars in Ukraine and the Middle East, etc. But inflation looks as if it's going to come down. Interest rates look as if they are going to have their first few cuts. Equally, ironically enough, on the NHS, if there is a settlement with the doctors, and even possibly without them, you will have a fall in the waiting lists because people are less ill in the summer, as you observed. The real crisis arises around now.
Yeah.
So
although
there's a number of reasons why it would be likely to be in October, November.
We do have a summer crisis in the NHS every year now as well. I mean, we like to keep it all year round, don't we? But that's the thing. I think 1 million more people, you say, are going to be having their fixed mortgages ending before a November election. So, you know, not good to have them spending more money. But we've also got more boats coming over the summer. No matter how many, he's not stopping the boats. The Channel migrant boats, they're going to be back. But there is always that thing, isn't there, where people feel poorer right now. I mean, you know, you wouldn't hold an election in January. No one's got money in the bank in January. Everyone's miserable and cold, worrying about the heating bill. Are things going to feel so much better by the spring, though? I mean, even if you did want to go for a spring election?
The answer to that is it's the reason I don't think there will be an election in the spring.
Because people are still
You'll have the
feeling
local elections. The Tories will do badly in the local elections, there's no question, particularly because of the base year from which these come. But the Tories will do badly, and that's one of the arguments why you should have an election in May. But no, people will begin to feel better as things feed through. The tax cuts, minute as they are, which come this month, people don't feel the benefit of any tax changes for a number of months. And therefore, the suggestion that you have a tax-cutting budget in March and go in May really just doesn't hold water. People need a period of time to experience whatever bad or good news they have. It's often said that the one group of polls that I loathe most is overnight opinion polls. You get these surveys. People don't actually change their minds until they've had time to digest something.
Most people don't even know the news. They haven't. But also, it's all very well saying, "Oh, people are going to get a bit benefit from a tax cut," at the same time as a lot of their other taxes have gone up. Even with inflation coming down, it's not going to deflation. I mean, we're not going to have prices going back to where they were a couple of years ago. It's still going to, and most people haven't got a pay rise over the last couple of years that has covered all of that. They'll still be facing higher heating bills for God knows how long. Everyone is going to still feel poorer.
I would agree with parts of what you've just said, Julia. The figures are absolutely clear. It's one of the problems that the government faces with inflation. And that is actually the overwhelming majority of people have had big pay increases. And the measurement at the moment is that pay increases are A, higher than the rate of inflation, and B, it's the reason why the service sector costs are not coming down as quickly as some other sectors. The figures out this morning from the British Retail Consortium show that food, particularly fresh food, the figures really are falling very rapidly. But as you say, falling for a rate of inflation, not falling overall. But people have got more money in their pockets. But it takes time for people to feel that benefit. And therefore, no, there's not going to be a spring election.
OK, he is. I mean, that's as adamant as you can be on that. Stay there for a moment, Robert. Tom Slater, would you agree that the strongest argument would be for Rishi Sunak, hold out as long as possible? I mean, there's also the old events, dear boy, events thing. Something might happen that could change the polls.
Being where we're standing at the moment, I think Lord Hayward makes a very strong point that the fact that the idea of going early, given the kind of current circumstances, given just the time of year, given all of these different
factors, they're 20 points behind in the polls.
That's exactly it. The one thing I would say, though, is that talking about, oh, inflation's definitely going to come down. One thing that's defined the past few years is like a bunch of black swan events all happening at once, and you only have to see what's happening with the Houthis in the Strait of Hormuz to see that something could come along which could completely wreck the alleged recovery we've experienced.
And we'll be talking about that later, because again, with the Houthi rebels and possibly, goodness knows what could be happening in the Red Sea, and major route for all our goods coming to Europe. Let me just ask you finally, Lord Robert Hayward, lots of talk about the runners and riders for the next Tory leadership. There seem to be a lot of assumptions, whenever the election is, that the Tories lose it. The question is by how much, in which case everyone is now basically getting themselves ready for that race for the next Tory leadership contest. Kemi Badenoch appears to be just streets ahead of everybody else. Should we put money on her?
No, well, again, I come back to my betting. Sorry, but I'd make 3 observations about Tory election runners. One is you don't know who's going to be returned. As you say, given the current position of the opinion polls, you have to be very cautious about who is likely to be in the Commons. Secondly, the favourite for Tory leadership elections generally overwhelmingly don't win. And thirdly, in terms of the general position at the moment, I wouldn't start talking about one leader or another, because there is this. You're looking at a poll, where people can vote who are not party members. And it's only a certain group of Tory supporters as well.
That's a very, very good point.
In those.
Yeah, you've got to be able to do the maths on who is actually eligible to vote. Lord Robert Hayward, always such a pleasure to talk to you, not just a Conservative peer, but also a polling expert there, and not, as we heard, a gambling man.